or no war, the tale of the sail must be told, especially the tale of the scows, as they're called, the fast sailboats that make a playground of Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin. They're built like a shallow dish, and in a light wind they skim over the water rather than through it. They've practically no draft and no keels or centerboards, and when they heel over, the crew scramble to the side hanging onto bilge boards that stick out like fins. With their billowing spinnakers, the boats carry nearly 1,000 square feet of canvas, and in a good blow they can ride downwind at a steady 20 knots. Carrying so much sail and with so little draft, the scows need the most expert handling. Sometimes, of course, the ship, being a she, gets a little wayward, but it's all part of the fun to climb out topside and wait until she's righted. A life on the ocean wave has its thrills, but there are still a few left for the intrepid skyscraper and scow skipper. The waters of these inland lakes may be fresh, but to navigate them in a scow needs all the skill of an old salt.
Perfect. Let's get into this and then we're going to go.
Well, as soon as the lakes were settled, boats were used to get around the lake. There just wasn't a road infrastructure around most lakes, and so boats were the way to go around. And sail power provided a lot of the impetus for getting goods and such across lakes. The working boats were joined by recreational boats at this time too, and people would go out and row and sail for pleasure. And then the pleasure sailors began racing. It's just human nature. We did it with horses, we did it on foot. So who was the fastest sailboat on the lake, I think became a natural outgrowth. As recreational boaters got more serious about racing boats, they looked for faster designs, and organized racing began probably around 1890 in this part of the country. The sandbagger was a boat that was a little bit lighter draft and a lot of sail area. Didn't have the heavy keel, and for ballast they used bags of sand and gravel in sacks that they would toss from one side to the other. This way they could go with a lighter boat that didn't have the massive heavy keel for stability and still crowd on a lot of sail area. These boats were affectionately known as gravel wagons because of the bags of sand and gravel that they would carry as movable ballast. As the sandbaggers became a little bit unwieldy, there was an evolution in design of the scow shape. The greatest catalyst was the Sewanaka rule. It was a design rule developed by the Sewanaka Corinthian Yacht Club of Oyster Bay, Long Island. And it basically provided a balance between waterline length and sail area. So if you had a boat like a sandbagger that had a fairly long waterline length, then you were prohibited from carrying much sail. So if you were to exploit the Sewanaka rule, you wanted a boat that measured very short on the water line, so you could add more sail area, more power, and then more speed. The first step in this evolution was a boat that was shaped a little bit like a dish, meaning that it would measure here in the water line, sit flat in the water, but have little longer overhangs in the front and the back. They were called skimming dishes, the early ones. Gradually, this dish shape flattened out, and the upshot was a Sewanaka rule boat, a scow, if you will, sat in the water and measured very short on the water line. But then when you tipped it up to its sailing lines, that flat bottom, as it tilted up, the water line length went virtually the entire length of the boat. So you could crowd on a tremendous amount of sail area and have a boat that proved to be very, very fast. Ballasted not with sandbags anymore, but by human ballast, with 3 or 4 sailors sitting up on the high side and balancing that boat up on its sailing angles. It was an amazing time because everybody that was building racing boats at this time knew that this was the direction that sailboat racing had to go. Local clubs and interlake associations were using the Sewanaka rule or a variation on that. There was a Sewanaka Cup competition that was held annually, and boats competed furiously for that. And this generated a tremendous, sort of a 3-part catalyst, if you will. Obviously, the racing was a big part of that. But there were wealthy men, business people, and men of some real means that were building new boats, testing new designs, pushing the envelope every year. And then this plethora of builders that have sprung up on the shores to satisfy this need, not only the commercial need for rowboats and working boats, but for these racing boats as well.
The history of the scout type boat is, to me, quite interesting. And the fact that Frenchmen up there in Montreal decided that, well, maybe we ought to go over the water rather than through the water. So they came up with this scow type hull. The boats came down from Canada to White Bear Lake, where Johnny Johnson got a hold of it.
John O. Johnson was one of the major figures in the boat building boom of the late 1800s. He arrived in this country in 1893 and immediately went to work for fellow Norwegian Gus Amundsen. In 1896, he left Gus Amundsen and struck out on his own.
When you think about these early builders, I think one of the amazing parts to me is that they were competitors. I mean, they were after the same customer. And yet, in the case of like my grandfather and the Amundsens, they lived right next to each other. They lived side by side. They had their shops right behind their homes. And they all had dances that they hosted in each other's houses. They all went to them. I guess you'd have to say it was like a friendly competition, which, you know, is, you'd think if you're after that same guy, it wouldn't be all that friendly, but it was.
John actually got married in Gus Amundsen's home. He married Marie Peterson, the daughter of Ingeborg. John didn't have a good place to build his boat, but Ingeborg had this big restaurant which was empty during the winter. So he cleared out all the furniture and he built his 38-foot sailboat in the restaurant.
Over the winter of 1899 to 1900, he built the Minnezitka, which is very much a scow.
The Minnezitka won the championship on White Bear Lake, and many people consider the Minnezitka to be the first true scow sailboat.
Very shortly after that, he built a boat for Frank Douglas where he put bilge boards in, sideboards, rather than the traditional cast iron centerboard. And that was the first scow with bilge boards. By 1904, bilge boards and double rudders were common. So a huge innovation there for Johnson. A big part of this evolutionary process, and as important as the Sewanaka rule, is the fact that you had wealthy people now here that the Industrial Revolution had fully taken hold. You had people with wealth and leisure time. And so you had the Pillsbury family from Lake Minnetonka, the flour milling people. You had the Wrigleys from Chicago. You had the Ordways from St. Paul, and others who were able to pump a tremendous amount of money into this, keep these boat builders experimenting and designing and creating.
There was enough money with the business people of the day where they could and did buy a boat every year if they thought that boat was a little bit quicker. So it was sort of throwaway boats in a way, and they weren't particularly small ones that you're talking about. They were the A-type scow boat.
So you had all of these builders, Johnson, Ramaley, Dyer, Peterson, Amundsen, Jimmy Jones, and others, all competing, all pushing this design. And in the space of from about 1895 to about 1900, we had made the transition to a completely refined scow shape.
What made my grandfather unique is that even though several builders were evolving toward this scow-like shape, someone had to make the break. You know, when that break was made certainly is up for discussion.
Personally, I don't believe there's any one single individual that could claim credit for developing the scow. I just find it remarkable that there was this moment in time, this 5-year, 4-year period in time wrapped around the Sewantika rule, some very talented boat builders and some very wealthy individuals, and a lot of great boat racing that took us from some rather stodgy old boats to the amazing scow that we're sailing today. By the late 1800s, there was a need for a broader association to govern all of the sailboat racing in the area, because people wanted to have a racing experience against all of the boats around the upper Midwest. And so at an interlake regatta on White Bear in 1897, the representatives of the White Bear Yacht Club called together representatives from 10 other lakes in the region.
That meeting was here at the Ramaley's Pavilion, which was the White Bear Yacht Club's headquarters at that time.
They sat down and formed an association around the idea of the scow shape of boat, which seemed to be suited to a lot of people. They named the association the Inland Lake Yachting Association and aimed for an annual championship regatta the following summer in August. One of the things that happened in the immediate aftermath of the formation of the Inland Lake Yachting Association was to nail down the length and the width and sail area of the boat. The Sewantika Cup rule was fine, but it was also very, very difficult to measure waterline lengths and exact sail areas. So they established the length of the boat at 38 feet and gave it a fixed width and a certain weight, and which again gave a little bit more stability and a little bit more longevity to these boats. Remember, the early boats were built so light that they oftentimes fell apart after a half dozen races. But they also created a class that would basically be a 20-foot boat, meaning a 20-foot waterline measurement under the Sewantika Cup rule. That's the 38-foot long A-scow.
That is the oldest racing class of sailing yachts in America. In other words, that's really quite a statement, because there are a lot of great designers, Herreshoff and other people, and nobody can match what J.O. Johnson did in terms of longevity of a single class boat.
A Class B measured 17 on the waterline. But the B boat gradually faded away, and by World War I, they were gone. In the early days of the Inland Lake Yachting Association, the sport was conducted not unlike the old days of horse racing, where you owned a horse and you paid for a trainer and you hired a jockey to ride it. The Nottoway Yacht Club up in Neenah was one of the early clubs, argued that sailing should be Corinthian, meaning no professionals, that the owners or families would do the sailing of the boats and not hire people to sail the boats for them. The Nottoway rule became standard to outlaw any professionals from steering boats or crewing on boats, that the inland would become completely Corinthian. The early days, of course, the rig that hoisted the sail was a gaff rig. If you can imagine a hull of a boat with the bow here and the stern here, mast up this way, main boom down here, there was another pole called a gaff that ran up the top of the sail this way. The use of the gaff was to control the shape of the sail, and you can imagine that if you raise the back of the gaff, you tighten up the back of the sail, or the leech. If you used a pulley that went further up the mast and pulled the gaff up, then you could snug up the luff of the sail and you could control the sail shape a fair amount. And over time, those gaffs got taller and taller and taller, and instead of a square sail, you ended up with a sail that was practically a triangle. And eventually that evolved into the Marconi rig, but that didn't happen until about the 1920s. Around 1905, a smaller boat was sanctioned by the ILYA. Not only was the Corinthian spirit accepted within the inland, but the fact that this was now opened up to people of lesser means that wanted to race boats. The sea boat was developed. It was a 20-foot scow with a cat rig. Easier to sail with a smaller boat, and a single sail, you didn't need as much crew. The sea boat became very much a boat for every man.
Gus Amundsen came up with the sea boat design. Johnson refused to compete against him right away. He said, no, Gus came up with that design, we should give him the business. Now, after a few years, of course, that changed. But that gives you kind of an idea of the good feeling between the families when somebody gives up a certain amount of business because of their love of the other person.
About a decade after the B-boats disappeared from the inland scene, there was clearly a need for a larger sloop, not on the order of an A-scow at 38 feet, but a boat that would be a little smaller and a little more manageable than a B-scow. And the idea for a 28-foot scow came from Arnold Meyer and a group of his friends. The Inland Lake Yachting Association decided that it would order 2 prototype boats, one from Johnson Boat Works and one from Palmer Boat Works. Johnson built a beautiful mahogany decked boat, the pointed bow. The E-boat was an immediate success, and it was a perfect boat for 3 people to sail, sometimes 4. A new E-boat only cost about $850 back in the 20s, and it grew in popularity and became one of the inland's most successful classes. The inland sailing back in the 1930s was curtailed by the Great Depression, and yet the social camaraderie within the organization wasn't what it could have been. So in 1934, at an invitational regatta, a group got together at the Mapleton Inn and decided that they would form an organized social group and philanthropic fraternity, if you will, connected to the inland. They organized themselves very quickly, called themselves the ILYA Bilge Pullers. It is an organization that has endured to the present day. Its original intent was to foster camaraderie between sailors, and it has really become an important arm of the Inland Lake Yachting Association. The initiation is, of course, secret, but there are legends that creep out about that. And there are a lot of shenanigans when you get a bunch of people together and you have an open bar for an hour or 2. Crazy things can happen. One of the early rules is that if you were caught without your badge at an inland event, you had to buy a new badge, of course, but then you had to stand around drinks for everybody in the room. They changed that rule, thankfully, in the 50s to just buying a new badge, but the legend around the rule never died. And so everybody believes that you still have to buy a drink for everybody in the house if you get caught without your badge. Nothing about bilge pullers needs to make sense.
Wood expands when you put it in water, and it contracts when you take it out of the water. And of course, we dry sail. That means we keep them out of the water when we're not using the boat to keep it light. They would take on 200 pounds, an older boat, over the course of a summer. But what would happen is with an older boat, particularly, the wood would seem to expand and contract more than in a newer boat. You took it out of the water, and then that first week, it pulled away and there would be cracks in that. And then they'd put putty-like stuff that was called caulking, because it was better in the water. So you'd put it in, every time you put it in, the doggone thing leaked for a while.
I remember sailing on the old sailboats. The third crew was known as a bailer also. We just sat down there with a cup and you'd go onto the low side going upwind and you'd throw water out. That was one of your responsibilities.
There's so many ways we're lucky today that we weren't in those days and made it very difficult. You wonder sometimes, how did we stay with it? You had to love to sail.
The sailing world around the inland was primarily a man's world in the early days, certainly in the first couple of decades. And it wasn't until 1934 that we had our first female champion. The Lilly sisters, Kay and Caroline from White Bear, had a brand new seaboat, the Black Rhythm. Bud Lynch was leading the regatta. The sisters had to figure out a way to wear Bud Lynch out. Obviously, the regatta is sailing and social, and so they matched Caroline up with Bud Lynch and told Caroline that she could stay out as late as she wanted to at night. They did have their dates each night of the regatta, and Caroline did keep Bud out late at night, and the wind came up as well. And Kay Lilly, who was the skipper of the Black Rhythm, was an outstanding heavy air sailor. And even though Bud had quite a lead, he was tired and came down to the last race. Kay sailed beautifully, and Bud Lynch finished 25th in the last race, and the championship to Kay Lilly, the first win by a woman in the history of the Inland Lake Yachting Association.
The performance advances that were made in the Scow family have to be accredited to Johnson Boat Works and Johnny Johnson and his family.
They had a long history, a 100-year history. There's no boatworks in this part of the country that can boast that kind of longevity. He was a remarkable craftsman. He drew good people to work for him. His sons went to work for him, and I'm sure that the quality of the boats that they produced was a huge reason why they stayed in business so long.
I mean, it clearly was trial and error. I mean, you had to build it, sail it, race it in a variety of conditions, and then you either knew you did the right thing or you went the wrong direction. I mean, you could change shapes relatively easily. And actually that continued, well, really until the fiberglass era. But I think all this creative thinking was driven by the fact that that's what made them sell a boat to that new person for next year, the fact that these innovations, in addition to the shape changes, led to success. I mean, it was really a godsend for development where you could essentially finance your creativity and on a repetitive basis. So if you had the better mousetrap, you had the market. If you wanted to win, you're buying boats. And if you're a boat builder, it's not a bad deal. So,
my father had always told me that Ivor Johnson was one of the finest people he'd ever met. And he said he was extraordinary in the way he conducted business and the way he was to deal with. So my goal was to work for Ivor. And I managed to wangle my way into working for him when I made arrangements to help Skip deliver a brand new seaboat. Skip Johnson was Ivor Johnson's son, one of his sons, who was very active in the boatworks and took it over in later years.
The Great Depression came to an end practically just in time for World War II. The United States went to war at the end of 1941. Sailing shut down. But by 1947, things had really spooled back up again, and the association was operating pretty much at full steam. It was around this time that we saw a major competitor to the Johnson Boat Works juggernaut in the scow building business. Harry Melgus created Boat Works.
Harry then was the manager of a chicken farm at Lake Geneva, where a fellow by the name of William Grunow owned it, and told Harry, Harry, I know you don't like chickens and you love sailboats, so I will give you an order for an A-boat and $1,000 if you want to start a sailboat business. And with that, in 1946, he brought one of Johnson's best builders, Oscar Nystrom, down, and they started building first rowboats, and when they saw that they didn't sink, they started building sea scows.
The Melgus Boat Works very quickly became a major force as Harry Jr., the one we know as Buddy, became involved in the Boat Works. Buddy was not only an innovator of scows, but rapidly becoming one of the finest and most widely recognized racing sailors in the world. So you take somebody who's got that kind of experience and reputation and put him with a boat building operation, and big things are going to happen.
Father was, no question, an innovator, way beyond his time. And we went off to Zenda and found a building there. It was an old airport hangar and a block building in front. And it was perfect. You know, when you get to Zenda and you get up over and you look to the south, it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. WW2 eliminated all the boat builders around Lake Geneva, and there was Beauvais and Palmer and Geneva Lake Boat Company. And so there was good craftsmen that knew how to build the inland lake scow type boats.
A D-boat is a seaboat hull, and they put a sloop rig on it. They move the mast step back, and they're going to have a jib. And so that's what we had. And the D-boat was really attractive and popular boat in the western side of the inland. So that would be basically Minnesota and Iowa. And over in Wisconsin, there were D-boats too. Melgus made D-boats, but not a lot of them. People were still heavy into seaboats. We won the D inland, and I think it was 63, and by 65, the class was dead.
When I sailed seaboats, it was a very easy boat to sail. There was much more leverage involved, and my wife sailed a seaboat competitively, herself at 110 pounds. She couldn't possibly sail a seaboat today competitively. You have to be big, you have to have a big crew, somebody who can hike hard.
They are sort of like muscle cars. They have too much engine, too much sail in this case. They're overpowered, just like the muscle cars were overpowered. So it took big guys who really like to get out there and fight the boat and fight the weather and fight everything.
It's a physical exercise, racing the boat, and each of us have plenty to do. And we enjoy that tremendously in a big breeze. The light air is a special challenge, and the guys that win in the light air manage to just keep it moving. Since 1999 particularly, the boats have been very competitive year after year after year. Conversation is how do you change the boat and make it more competitive. It doesn't need to be more competitive within its own fleet. The seaboat has been a breeding ground for a lot of the really strong inland sailors. The onshore camaraderie is great. The competitiveness on the water is severe, and that's the way it should be.
It's a very sound, tactical boat that you also need to know how to sail fast. It's not easy. Sailing a seaboat's hard.
The relationship between Melgus and ourselves, even though, as I mentioned, we were competitors, we also appreciated the difficulties that we both had in terms of getting materials and kind of really the willingness to help each other out.
We had a real setback, and our setback was arson fire. Melgus Boat Works got burned down. The first building had 12 seaboats over here, and there was 12 E-boats over here on this side, and in the middle there were 2 more E-boats. Boy, that cedar does burn good. When I got to the place and I saw the bows drop off of these brand new E-boats, it's like somebody got me right in the heart. We had a lumber shed that was full of Sitka spruce. It's an airplane spruce, 16-inch wide timbers, 8 inches thick, 40 feet long, not a knot in them. Gorgeous.
And all their, spruce burnt up, and they couldn't, they just couldn't get any because it came, we shipped it in from Alaska, and at that time we had a lot, on hand. So we lent them, all the spruce that they needed.
All of our friends, like my Billy Matson, my ice boat buddy at Madison, had a lot of woodworking equipment. They bought planers and saws and everything else, and we popped her back together, and in 2 months' time we delivered our first boat.
If something had reversed and it was the other way around, I'm sure they would have done the same thing. So, it's kind of, if you reflect back on it, it's kind of an interesting thing, because in the early days here you've got these competitors, they're living right next to each other, they're going to dances together, they're helping each other out on one level, and they're trying their darnest to get the same guy for that boat order. And then you fast forward umpteen years, large part relationship, competitive but still, friendly. So kind of a unique thing.
The M16, that 16-foot little sloop, I thought was one of the best scows that the inland ever sailed. I can remember when my wife and Jane Pagel were sailing those boats, we had over 100 at the inland regatta, and that boat has died.
It was a great foundation of many of the sailors now that are successful in the E-boat, A-boat, and other classes around the world. The MC was another class that was a derivative of the M16. Then Father decided that, I think I'm going to take this M16 hull and I'm going to put a cat rig on it. I thought, that's probably all right, but I'll get aluminum tube and we'll put a 26-foot mast on it and see how that goes. It was flexible, swept back spreaders, big main. Ooh, hey, this is pretty fast. And all of a sudden it's just outperforming the M16.
The MC took off like crazy. Ivor Johnson and his son went to the board of directors of the MC Association and said, we'd like to build this boat. All of a sudden Johnson was in competition with Melgus making MC scows, which was the fastest growing scow fleet in the inland, and was probably a very good thing for competition and keeping price down. But it was always a tough competition between Johnson and Melgus.
When Harry Melgus came up with this idea in the 50s, and then Buddy and him developed it in the 60s, it really took off because it was a single-handed boat that you could rig by yourself, you could trail by yourself, but it absolutely could be a boat you could share with your spouse, a friend, with grandkids, and it's very popular nationwide. It wasn't until 1996 when we really started, things changed. We started vacuum bagging the boats. We built a much different backbone. And then 98, we improved that even more by making the backbone twice as wide, twice as strong. The boats got really stiff and strong, which matters.
It's complex enough that makes it interesting, but it's simple enough that everybody can do it. I think that's what's fun about it, personally. The tiller tells you if it's not right? If the boat is happy, the tiller has no pull, the boat just kind of sails along fast and it's really nice. If the boat is unhappy, you get a lot of helm and you can feel the boat kind of just slugging along. One of the ways I look at it is the boat is like an airplane turned sideways. You have a wing in the air, but we also have a wing underwater. And if they're not in unison, the boat doesn't fly right, so to speak. Like I tell folks, we fly all the time, right? When's the flight going the best? When the plane is smooth and they take the seatbelt sign off, whatever. If you're on the MC Scow and they put the fasten the seatbelt sign on, you're probably not going very fast, right?
Yeah.
Because the boat's all over the place. That's not what you want. You want it to be an easy ride. The good part about this boat is the lighter air. You get the boards down more. The boat will point and perform. But if you feel the boat, I would call it tripping over the board, or you get a lot of helm and the boat's just not accelerating, you pull the board up a little bit and all of a sudden the boat just takes off. That's one of the things I think is crucial that you can do on this boat, which you can't do on other boats, is adjust that part of it. The crew is actually quite critical, especially when it's windy. Makes the maneuvering a lot easier, adds weight to the boat so you can keep it on its feet, and frankly, it kind of makes it more fun. You have somebody to talk to, so that's a good part too. But it's also a selling point that you don't need a crew all the time.
For a lot of people that are, my age or even younger, an MC is great because I don't have to worry about organizing crew. If I want to sail, I can sail. If I don't want to, I'm not disappointing my crew, so that's great.
What I really like about the MC is that it's a human scale. I can sail it as a woman all by myself. With my own weight on one side of the boat, I can just move ever so slightly and making sure that I've got everything just right inboard, but also with my body weight. And I'm learning that I can just push down one little inch or so, and I don't have to hike really hard. That's really nice for me as a female.
One of the unique things about the MC is you do go to a lot of regattas by yourself. The first regatta I got there, everyone was so willing to talk and share, and people are helping each other out, covers on and off, masts up, and it kind of builds this whole fleet family mentality that I think it has. And you ask them why, and you're like, why would you do this? And the response is, well, the fleet grows this way. And I think it's kind of a lesson learned. The MC is on the upward trend right now. If you watch it nationally, people are buying boats like crazy. I think it's because of the attitude. People want to help and see it grow, and it's probably the best thing the class has going for it, in my opinion.
One day I came out here and went sailing, and Harry Malgus, Buddy Malgus' father, said, I'm about ready to go into the fiberglass business to build fiberglass sailboats. Would you like to come join us and sell them? I said, you bet. Should I come today or tomorrow? He said, you better give them 2 weeks notice. And that's how I got started with selling the Malgus sailboats, and it's been a wonderful life.
Wow, what a difference in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Smiley Freitag got so many of us into MC Scows, and he sold me and delivered to me 10 MC Scows.
My father, Bill Freitag, Smiley Smiles, as he's called, passed away some years ago. Miss him dearly. I'm happy to say that I'm sailing as much as I possibly can, and I think about him often on the water, and I've got my kids sailing. I learned a lot about life from my father sailing. I learned about integrity and honesty and doing what's right and sportsmanship and really passion about anything and everything, and particularly about sailing. I learned from my father, and I'm grateful. It's something I'd like to pass on to my kids, and hopefully they pass it on to their kids as well.
The junior programs that have been initiated around the Inland Lake Yachting Association are second to none. We're taking kids and putting them on the water, making them learn about Mother Nature. Pitting himself against her is something that you never stop learning.
I was a little girl, and we had a small little boat called a pram, and the neighbors had them too, and I was able to get into that when I was like 5 or 6 years old. I'd go around the dock and in our little tiny bay. So we didn't go out into the wind line. We just stayed between docks. And then we'd flip them over and go underneath and make great sounds underneath, and we'd play in the water underneath them. So they were our little toy, our floaty.
I look at how they teach these kids at the age of 4 and 5 now. I'm looking at how brave they all are sailing out there today. You're
fantastic.
Like, whoa. It's really terrific how it's progressed in teaching.
Those kids now know something about how to care for a boat, how to make it go quicker to point A to point B by trimming sails in relationship to the wind direction. Get the fear out of capsizing. Put the joy of sailing fast, and then the rewards that come when you get into competitive sailing. That's there's nothing like that.
young sailors move from the Optimus dinghy into the X-boat, taking a skill level with them that is dramatically higher than anybody who would have started in an X-boat. So the quality of sailing in the X-fleets now is exponentially higher because of the success of the Optimus dinghy.
I would have given anything to be able to sail an Opti when I was a little kid. We started on X-boats. That was it.
Yeah. The board of directors decided they needed a boat for youth sailing, and something that was very stable, something that, like a well-balanced airplane, if you just let go of everything, it would come up to into the wind and stop. They asked for design ideas. John O. Johnson of White Bear built 4 of them. In fact, there's a story about a squall that came through White Bear during the racing and tipped over all of the scows, but the 4 X-boats sailed through it and survived. And so the inland board knew that they had a winner on their hands, and the X-fleet in the inland was popular right from the beginning as a youth boat and has developed into a tremendous annual event. Friendships are formed at that regatta that carry on well into adulthood, and generations of X-boaters whose fathers and grandfathers sailed in the X-championship now are racing their own X-boats.
I started crewing when I was 6 years old on an X-boat, and I'm there with the skipper and I'm enjoying life enormously out on this boat. But at 9, I get my own X-boat. It was made by Fletcher Driscoll. What I remember is just put that sail up. We got a lake that's 7 miles long. I could sail anywhere. I had total freedom. What my parents and everybody knew was that I knew how to sail. I knew how to take care of myself. There are real adult responsibilities out there. You can really get in a jam, but I knew what I was doing and they knew I knew what I was doing. So I could go, I could visit friends. I could go anywhere on the lake. I'd be gone all day. And I don't think I processed it the way that I'm telling you. I just felt it. And I felt trusted. I felt comfortable and confident. And sailing taught me all of that.
What we try to do, of course, is bring in young kids as soon as we can too. It's just fun to have them on board. I mean, you could just see the excitement in their face, and if you can put them on the helm and the last leg, and you're doing well, they will never forget that experience.
There's nothing to do with scow sailing but to pass it on to our kids. It is so deeply ingrained. It's at the cellular level. We don't push it on anybody. If the kids are into it, it's fun. Well, Nora, who is 10 now, she gets out there and she pulls that main sheet and she's steering that boat, and we got a whole new generation. She's feeling that exact freedom of being able to work with the wind and the waves, and she's 3 inches taller this week. It's just something that changes a person.
My very first sailing coach was the legendary Gordy Bowers. Gordy's amazing. When I first went to practice, even as somebody that had never been in a sailboat before, he comes up to you and he wants to see you flourish and wants to see you become the best sailor that you can be. And I really felt like from the first season I sailed, he had goals for me that I didn't even know that I'd want to have.
Gordy is just one of the legends of Lake Minnetonka. He's super involved in the sailing school right now. He's still coaching. I think he just turned 80. And he's got his sailing shorts on and his bibs, and he's always out on the water. He's coaching kids, he's coaching adults, and he really has an incredible passion for sailing.
When I was 23, I was a full-time coach out here, lived out here in the summertime. The coaching thing started to come naturally because I was interested in it and interested in how we're a psych major, so it gave you some insight into how your mind worked and kind of how other people's minds worked a little bit. So it's much easier to develop a kid's skill set from the beginning than it is to turn around different things and try to correct things that have been done wrong for 5-6 years. At that point, I decided to look seriously into coaching the LMSS Lake Minnetonka Sailing School here. I'm enjoying it. I think the kids are a challenge. Every year is a challenge. The school's changed a lot. I've learned a lot over that time. Our drills, our style, everything is way better than when I first started. So it's been rewarding to see that development.
My crew Paige and I sail really well together, so we were looking forward to some potentially big breeze. out on Lake Winnebago. And the first race of the regatta, we went out there and we were actually postponed for quite a while because it was too windy. I don't go into a race thinking we're going to win this race. It's baby steps, you know, where are we going to start, what side of the course, what side of the line. And we got off the line exactly where we wanted to be with great speed, a great angle, and we took off. We got the lead and we held the lead, and it was just kind of exhilarating because when you're in first, you're always a little bit worried about people coming up behind you and passing you. And so a lot of it was just focus, let's hike, let's keep this boat down. We're going fast, and we held our spot and we won the first race of the regatta. From there, you know, you're riding a high, just excited that you have your first inland race win. And the conditions were all over the place. I crossed the finish line of the last race of the event and looked up at Paige, who was in a spectator boat watching, and she gave me the thumbs up. And so I knew at that moment that we won the event. We were the first women to win an inland championship. And I don't think I knew at the time that that was the case, but it made it even more sweet to know that we had a historical win as well as just a regatta win, a first regatta win in a big event. So we were very excited.
One woman will make a huge difference in the demeanor of the whole crew. If you throw all males together on an A-boat, it becomes a little bit too aggressive and a little too much swearing, too much competition. And with one woman aboard, it tends to lighten it up.
My daughter just started sailing with us. She's 17 years old, and she's a sailor in her own right, but she started crewing with us on the E-boat last summer, doing the jib, which is a difficult job. And she has really stepped into that role and learned it very well and is doing an awesome job. So it's really fun having something that I can do with my daughter and be competitive and be physical together and also work with the team, and it's been really rewarding for both of us.
There are women that sail all of the different scows that I know of. I have some friends who steer sea scows and some ladies on Minnetonka. They have an all-women's team E-boat as well. It definitely helps to see women out on the water. I think too for the younger kids coming up, seeing women succeed and just seeing women that own boats and aren't just crews all the time is really helpful.
Having the confidence to go out there when it's really windy and pull off some tricky maneuvers and go sailing is really good, and that plays into other parts of your life. Just knowing that you can get the job done is important.
I mean, I think a huge part of the success of the Inland Lake Yachting Association is the family sailing. That's all available because the Scow is such a great platform for families to sail in. The stability of the boat, the ease of use of the boat, the ease to trailer the boat, the ease to set it up. I mean, all that contributes to the success that I think the Scows have had. I kind of went straight into it, and it was really because of my dad. He wanted me to sail E-Scows. He wanted to sail with me, to be ripping around the lake, going 20 knots with your dad on the front of the boat and you know, trying to win. It's a unique thing. It's cool.
I grew up sailing with 8 siblings. It's always been Scows for us. It never has been difficult competing with and against family members, at least in our family. We would all gather back at the kitchen table for dinner when we were younger, and we would be sharing the war stories about, you know, tacking and jibing with our friends and family.
I don't think there's any replacement for a finely hand-built wooden boat. There's just something organically perfect about it. But as the boats moved to glass, there were a lot of bad fiberglass boats built with the balsa wood cores and soaking things up, and nobody really had it figured out.
You know, we started early on in '65, where we were transferring into fiberglass construction. And the transition was very gradual. I mean, we started, you know, subcontracting out. We got into sailboats that were subcontracted out.
In the early 70s, Johnson Boatworks was experimenting with a different construction technique. They still weren't completely sold on fiberglass as the ultimate building material.
You know, one day my dad was going through a drugstore, and he noticed a little toy. and it was one of these vacuum forming toys that you could buy for your kid. And so they got to thinking, well, we could just go to vacuum form boats. But this was really early on. And the vacuum forming of that time period, you know, was restricted to like suitcases or small, relatively small objects. But they decided they could do a boat. And so, being the Norwegians they were going to do the whole thing themselves, and basically they were going to use stuff they could find.
Ivor built a vacuum forming machine that was big enough to build an M16.
They had it figured out that they would start, you know, with something small, test it, see how it worked. In this case, it was a little 7-foot long dinghy.
The Johnson brothers had learned the hard way that if you just take a boat and stick it into the machine and bring down the piece of plastic and hit it with a vacuum, all of a sudden the boat disappears.
You know, it just turned it into just kindling wood. They knew this farmer that had a bunch of field corn.
The field corn was put inside the molds to give the molds compressive strength.
So they stuffed the thing full of field corn so you could draw the air through the irregular shape of the corn, and then that would work perfectly. And then they went up to like a 14-foot long, you know, rowboat. Eventually we got this phone call from U.S. Rubber and these guys in New York. So what are you guys doing with all these 18-foot long sheets of thermoplastic? And we said, well, we're building rowboats. And they go, huh. They just didn't think that was possible. And it led to, well, can we come out and see how you're doing this? You know, 3 suits from New York show up, and they've got, you know, the high gloss polish on the shoes. When they walked in, they were stepping on this field corn, which was laying on the floor. And they said, well, what's with this corn? And we go, well, that's what we reinforced the mold. And they just couldn't get over it. And they said, well, can you build a boat for us? And, you know, Ivor and Buster go, well, sure, you know, and they clamp in this sheet and they start the thing up and they go, well, the guys from New York go, well, where's the gauges that tell you that the plastic has the right temperature? And they go, well, we don't use the gauge. We have this stick, and then we poke up on the sheet, and when it feels about right, then we drop it down and we suck the air out and we make the boat. And sure enough, you know, they went like this and felt it was about right, dropped it down. This 20 minutes later, this boat pops out, and these guys go, we've never seen anything like this. They were just dumbfounded. Eventually got to where we made an M16.
The boat that came out was quite strong. You could take a crowbar and smash it against the hull of the boat and it would just bounce off. But it was too flexible, so we built one of them and we named it the Flexible Flyer because it was tough, but it wasn't rigid enough to be a good race boat. So that boat had a production run of 1.
You know, then the fiberglass materials were, you know, they were new. You know, it was ingrained balsa wood cores and, you know, stuff that you just wouldn't use now, but that was the state of the art then. And so we would build the molds, and they would do the layups, and we'd get the hulls and the decks unassembled. We'd do the rigging, the assembly in our shop. And of course, the old woodworkers that had been there all their lives, you know, they couldn't stand the smell of fiberglass. They didn't like the feel of it. They didn't like anything about it. And we probably weren't all that fond of it either, actually, but you could see that that was the future, and that's how it was going to go. Eventually, as the fiberglass materials were improving steadily, then it became more and more fiberglass, less and less wood. So when we got to that winter of '75, we built 3 wood seaboats, and that was really the last of the wood boats. And by then we were doing our own glass work.
They brought their fiberglass boat construction in-house. They built a new separate building just for that task in 1974. The boats that came out then were built on-site, and the quality of the boats went through the roof.
And as it turned out, the woodworkers that had been with us all their lives, they were retiring at kind of the same rate almost that we were shifting into fiberglass, which was new people, younger people. They didn't have the history of the wood. So we were looking now for experienced glass people.
The experience with the two major builders of Melgus and Johnson at that time is that their fiberglass boats that they had already started producing were not of a very high quality. So the confidence was not there in the buying public. The experience with the new E-boat, building them out of Arex foam, meant that all of a sudden they were phenomenally good quality boats. We were sitting on the water at Green Lake at the Inland Championship. So it was down to about 7 A-boats at the Inland Championship. And there was no wind, and so we had our class meeting right there, and Curly Perigo was again beating the drum about, we have to build new boats, we have to build new boats. And they hadn't built a new A-boat since 1966, and it was 1976, so it had been 10 years. And these boats were all aging, and as they aged, they got harder to take care of. So from my experience with Johnson Boat Works and the E-boat, I knew that an A-boat could be built out of fiberglass, even though various people were saying it couldn't be done. In that discussion on the water, Curly Perigo agreed to strip his boat of all of the hardware, bring it to us in Minnesota, and we would take a mold off of that boat. So he brought it up and took it over to John Vogt's garage. And he had a garage that was over 40 feet long and was wide enough for 2 A-boats. And that is where we took Curly's boat and prepared it and pulled the mold off of it. Curly was at the Inland Championships in 1978, and he was having dinner or drinks in the bar with Buddy Melgus, who was by that time running Melgus Boat Works. And in a letter described by Buddy, he got Buddy drunk and got Buddy to agree to build a new A-scow for $10,000. Curly's new boat was finished the day before the 1979 Inland Championship, and that's when the dam broke. It was like a tsunami. There was pent-up demand, and people were they were excited about sailing A-boats. And the boats were gorgeous, especially compared to our broken down old battle wagons and wood that we had been sailing up to that point.
The market was great because we had all these old customers that had wood boats. So it wasn't really that we had to find a totally new market. We just had to go to the old market and say, we do have a better mousetrap. With fiberglass, no refinishing, the product got better and better and better. You could be competitive long period of time. And then once that whole transition happened, then to grow the market became more and more of a challenge.
Over the years, every boat that I get is better than the previous boat. And I would say since the year 2000, they've only built great sailboats. It is amazing when you consider that we have one boat builder in Scows, that they would still care enough to continue to make a better boat, that they would still be inventive enough to do it. They should be narcoleptic about it and just let it roll and let that thing stay the way that it is, but they don't. Continue to rethink the rigging, continue to redesign deck layouts, continue to look at better spar material. 20 years ago, we were bending masts fairly regularly. It's unheard of now. This boat disappears underneath you, and you are able to really focus.
When I first started sailing the E-boat, we were riding the lee boards, and you had manila rope, and you didn't have any ratchet blocks. Well, from 62 to 72, you were getting hiking straps. The lines were let out to hiking positions. There weren't any winches on the boat anymore. The boards were flush on the deck so you could hike. You had aluminum masts. I mean, it was a significant transformation, and the way you sailed the boat was significantly different.
That's a really cool part of the class, is the continued experimentation, trying to improve the boat all the time to, one, make the boat more fun to sail, but also make the boat easier to sail so it's more accessible to a bunch of people.
One of the most amazing things that AZCs goes down the line have done is there's a lot of wisdom, and let's not go too fast. Let's not go to carbon fiber, technology tomorrow, because as costs go up, participation will generally go down. And so there's been always a conscious effort to balance economic affordability with performance.
The first adjustable traveler I saw was about 1954. We were sailing at Oshkosh, and Barbara Seidel from Pine Lake flew over the top of us like we were standing still in a blow. And I asked my crew, I said, what's she doing that we aren't doing? And he said, she broke something. Her traveler's all the way to the side of the boat. And then she came about, and he said, oh, look, it went to the other side of the boat too. Well, she was the first one that had a traveler that was adjustable and could go the full length. But I'll never forget that day. She was really fast, won that race, and I talked to Buddy about it, and he said, oh, I can put that in your boat. It'll only cost you $55. Bring it down, we'll fix you right up.
The e-Scow, the first big change was going to an aluminum mast, non-rotating.
When we got our first E-boat in 1968, we're up there at Torch Lake, and I'm all excited about this brand new boat, as everybody is when they get a new boat. And ironically, about the same time, Kay Comfort Larkin pulled up with her new E-boat with the prototype aluminum mast. And you're like, huh, wow, how'd that happen? It was obviously disappointing, for me personally, but it also began this appreciation of how the e-Scow is something that's always evolving, always changing, always improving, always moving forward.
You want to have the opportunity, if something better comes along, to go there. If it improves the boat, if it helps attract more sailors, if it makes the boat easier to sail, faster, I think those are positive things that helps the class evolve and stay current.
The challenge for our class and our group is to always keep the e-Scow relevant.
Well, when we first started sailing D-boats and scows, all the scows, there weren't vangs. And then people sat on the boom. The way you held the boom down, going downwind, is you sat on it. And so then we got block and tackle. You'd had an eye on the boom and an eye on the deck, and you'd clip it on when you're going downwind and then get it off. And if you failed to get it off, going into a jibe, you were going to be upside down. And so that was it. Then they evolved into other vangs, just for a rod backwards, and then they came up with a circular vang that was a track, and that was a winner, and that took over in all the boats.
The vang is a tracked radial vang on the boat that goes almost side stay to side stay. When you're sailing downhill or downwind in a big breeze, that vang stabilizes the boat.
I started Mel Gaspars with Buddy when I developed the quote-unquote Brereton Vang in 1980. Even building prototypes in the shop there in Zenda, Buddy would walk by and go, what the hell is this whole thing all about? It's, that seems like an awful lot of work for a Vang. And it wasn't until we got the first sail with one in a Wednesday night race at Lake Geneva Yacht Club, and we're going along, and he comes roaring up in the white heat as center console, and he's looking at us. He yells, pull the Vang harder, and we pull the Vang, and he goes running up to the side of the boat, jumps on the E-boat in the middle of the race, and he pushes Mikey O'Brien out of the way and starts yanking on the Vang, and going, wow, I think you really got something here. And then he goes, so now, take me back to my motorboat, please. So But neither one of us expected that Vang to, be something that allowed you to change gears so easily on an e-boat. It really made a difference, particularly for the lighter crews who could depower the rig and kind of get another gear. That's the way the development should go. It should help level the playing field. That was an interesting thing about the asymmetrical development. The first one that I saw, Timmy O'Keefe had retrofitted his existing boat with a bowsprit. The asymmetrical basically hoisted to about the same spot that the old symmetrical hoisted to, not the top of the mast, but down. And I remember just driving around Lake Geneva and seeing it and thinking, wow, that looks kind of interesting. But then as I drove around the other side of the lake and saw it from the leeward side and saw it from behind, it just didn't look right. So I went back, talked to Harry and said, look, if you really want to do this, we really ought to get the asymmetrical to go to the top of the mast so that the leech of the spinnaker and the leech of the mainsail kind of all line up together and it flows right. Before that day, I was very anti-asymmetric, but when I saw the potential there, I was like, come on, we got to at least give this a shot. We got to try this. The inland was at Mendota, and I went up to the class meeting and, made a presentation about the asymmetrical and how this was the future of the class. And, it all went over kind of like a lead balloon. And, some people even on the board of the National E at the time got up and left the room. At the end of the day, what, was important was that everybody on the board wanted what was best for the class. And a lot of guys, put in effort to make that happen, whether it was some of the other people who modified their boats like mine was to, be demonstration boats. And they made a big sacrifice where they're going to regattas and not getting scored and doing all that, to the people who were skeptical but spent a lot of time and energy listening. Through the whole process, I think everybody agreed that the boat was going to be faster and more exciting. But the conversation, the debate was all often apples and oranges. One group is saying, it's going to be faster, it's going to be more fun. The other group is saying, but it's going to be too expensive, we're going to lose people. And it wasn't until it took time for those two conversations to kind of meld together.
They ultimately voted in favor of doing this transition, so it meant a lot of retrofitting of the existing symmetrical boats.
So it basically took 6 years to get everybody on the same page, so to speak.
Given that we are an evolutionary boat fleet and we try to do things in a way to not obsolete people overnight, we decided that we wanted to continue on with the traditional aluminum rig. And so with the introduction of diamond stays, we were able to provide enough support to keep the existing rig so we didn't obsolete the existing jib and main. So another matter that we were discussing was changing the rudders from the early rectangular shape to a foil-shaped rudder. And we had a couple members of the fleet use that who came back and said, this is the first time I've been under control in all conditions. And I'm very happy that we have a foil-shaped rudder that gives us much better control of these boats, especially now that we're traveling at ever higher speeds with the new asymmetrical spinnaker configuration. It's a safer boat.
There's no doubt that in a big breeze, an E-Scow with a symmetrical spinnaker was fun to sail, but it's a lot more fun with an asymmetrical. So a lot less boats tipping over downwind.
We have a lot more sail area off the wind. We're much more under control, and they're still very tactical. You're much more willing to snap through a jibe and run off and chase a puff here and there and so forth to get down the wind.
To me, it was just obviously a better mousetrap. And just the way, in 1968 when I'm 14 years old, sitting at the Torch Lake Yacht Club parking lot, and Kay Larkin pulls in with her aluminum mast. I go, that's a better mousetrap. So that's better for the class.
I remember when I sailed E-boats, it was Gloria and I and a third crew, and reasonable boats that have a good longevity where you can have a hand-me-down system from new boats to used boats to used boats and finally to the junkyard. The E-boat is for the family boat, perfect.
3 big guys can compete against a family of 4 that aren't, huge, and we can all, have an equal shot at it.
For a monohull one design class, I mean, there's no boat that's really, has the top end speed of an E-Scow. And then there's no real boat in the US where you can have 90 boats on a starting line. I mean, the racing is very intense. There's nothing like that. I mean, the speed of the boats is just second to none. The racing is so exciting.
To me, the E-Scow is probably the finest one design racing sailboat in the world. You don't need to be a guy with big physical nature to do it. It just takes 3 normal people. Women can sail in it just as easy as men. And you can trailer it really easy. You don't have a keel underneath the thing. It goes behind a normal car on a trailer. I've trailered E-Scows and stuff at 80, 90 miles an hour. You don't even know the thing is back there. And you can rig it really fast. And so it's really launch friendly. There is no other boat in the world that kind of size, almost 30 feet long, that you can manhandle so easily.
An A will take you for a ride, but you get to take an E-boat for a ride.
The camaraderie and the competition that you experience on a race course is really something. And when you get through with the race and you go in and you have a glass in your hand and the opportunity to now debrief and discuss with your competition all the good things that you did on the race course and maybe some of the things that they did that weren't so good that gave you that win, those are precious moments. And I think there's no other sport that shares the ideas as we do in sailing. And from that standpoint, I think it's something you can take from 8 to 80 and enjoy.
The competitive part is what drives people to go to regattas. I mean, they want to beat that sucker next to them, and they are out to win. And that would involve, of course, if you kind of goofed up, paying the penalty, which now fortunately is doing a couple of spins and saying you're sorry and hang your head and then try and beat them. But you've got this thing going on the water, and then when you get to shore, you're kind of laughing about it. Or maybe you're not quite laughing, but by that evening you certainly are. And that contact, as brief as it may be for 2-3 days, maybe turns into a lifelong friendship. I mean, you've got that common bond.
The other thing I like is being able to be on the same course with 3 or 4 generations of people. So the mingling of generations is huge. That's what sailing, and I think scows in particular.
Everybody shares the knowledge and tries to help make everybody better.
It was about mentoring, give away all your knowledge.
Buddy Melges is always wonderful to race against because he always points out what you're doing wrong in the best possible way. He'll sail up next to you and say, Fletcher, if you just do this or you just do that, you'll go better. And he, to me, epitomizes what we should do for each other.
The Smiley Freitag used to tell me, and God bless him, Smiley would say, I really never care about, I don't care about the top 10 people in this regatta. They're fine, they'll take care of themselves. He said, I'm not really even worried about the guys in the middle because, they're probably striving to get better and they're going to buy a newer boat and a better sail. The ones I care about, he said, was the ones in the back, because those are the guys that get discouraged and they need a little help, and they need a little stuff, they need a little this, a little that, and they also need a little luck. Lucky things happen. He can get a puff, he can get a shift in that scow boat. He could be in a $6,000 boat or a $26,000 boat and get a lucky shift or a puff and win that race or be third in that race. And next thing he knows, he's in the top 10 in the regatta and gets a trophy, and his wife thinks he is something. Because it's one of those classes where you can't buy it. You can buy a lot of stuff, but you cannot buy a regatta win.
I was learning how to sail fast, and Eric called me. We had a regatta we were going to in Shreveport. He said, "You're lacking one thing." I go, "What's that?" He goes, "When things don't go well, you sort of relax. The next thing you need to put into your sailing life is you've got to give 100%, 100% of the time. And if you do that, you're going to win." And it came true. One of the first regatta I ever won was in Shreveport that weekend. And the measure of myself out there now has been, did I stay true to what he asked me to do? But I don't have the touch for it that I had, but I'll guarantee you, I'll give it 100%, 100% of the time. And the wind goes flat, I don't lose my focus. I know how to stay in that game. And there's pleasure in staying in the game. I don't care if I win or lose particularly. I'd rather win, but I'm not the least bit upset if I don't. But it became the key to enjoying these scows for me.
When you're racing just at your local level, the whole group kind of rises to the level of the top sailor at that fleet. But the top sailor in the fleet may not be one of the top sailors in the country. And so by going to regional or national regattas and exposing yourself to top sailors in the country, you can take that back home, and the entire level of the class rises when you push yourself against the top people in the class.
The sport when I was growing up was combative. What was modeled by adults was you yell at people on your own boat and blame them for everything that was probably the skipper's fault, and then you yell at other boats. And there was a tension out there. And as a 6, 9, or even 15-year-old kid, I didn't process any of that. I just yelled at people on the boat, and I yelled at other boats. That was exactly what was modeled. I normalized it. We'd be sailing, and people would still be yelling, and I was done yelling. And I would just think, don't you get enough of this crap during the week? Can't we be out here enjoying and giving our best without tearing each other's skin off? I want to beat you, and I'm going to give you everything I can. What you just said to me guarantees that I'm going to give it everything I can. But let's stop that. And when I quit yelling and people quit yelling, in general, we all got two huge benefits. We became much better sailors. It wasn't his fault that I sailed poorly when he crossed me. It was my fault. I didn't set up well enough to stay away from him. Nobody messes with any. If you want to sail fast, you stay out of those situations. You don't get in them and yell at somebody.
You know, we learned a long time ago, a quiet boat is a fast boat.
You build one team, you focus on we're in this together. It's not about, somebody messing up, or not about blame. It's about keeping positive and staying focused and always looking ahead.
We're talking about where the wind is, when the puffs are coming, if it's going to be a header, if it's going to be a lifter, boats around us, are we going to need to tack or duck?
Teamwork, working together and making the boat perform, I think builds this sense of camaraderie between the crew that, at the end of the day, when they have success, they know they are all responsible for that. It wasn't just the skipper. And when they, don't do well, they can all still blame the skipper at the end of the day. So it's a win-win.
The family of Scow-type boats has gave me a foundation to be able to sail any boat that's out there in the world. The angle of heel on a scow is so critical. When the boat heels, now the board is vertical in the water, the rail is just wet, so we're at minimum wetted surface, and maintaining that touch of fine tune on the angle of heel that the scow demands sharpens anyone up to sail a boat outside of a scow family.
Whenever I get in other sailboats, they admire the scow sailors' skills, because the scow sailboat talks to you for every little adjustment. That experience transferred onto other boats is very, it applies very well.
One of the unique features about scow sailing, of course, is that all the ballast is human. And you have people hiking out or riding the bilge boards in the earlier days to provide the balance. But the main balance of the process comes from the interaction between the helmsman and the person pulling the main sheet, and even more important, the person pulling the jib. These sail balance and trim of the boat, angle of heel, and the touch on the helm, to keep all of that in balance is really the key to making a boat go fast. It's like you're sailing a giant surfboard. And the angle of heel is hugely important for boat speed. But it also means that you're just a few degrees away from disaster. If a puff comes by and your jib man doesn't respond and let the bow come up, you're over on your side. So there's quite an element of adventure steering a scow that's not present in a keelboat. You're a whole lot closer to a windsurfer if you're sailing a scow than you are a keelboat.
They're like little thoroughbreds. If you know what you're doing and you sail them well, they just perform just gorgeously. And with a lifetime of sailing, I think that I have that feel for when it just accelerates. It feels so good, and you've got it on the right notch, and it's going beautifully. And then when you're not, you're kind of trying to figure out what it is that you need to do to maneuver it to the position where it'll actually respond. No matter what scow I get on, it kind of, they have a standard feel that is just wonderful. Really good design.
As you're getting closer and closer to the starting sequence, do we think this a side is favored? Does it look like there's more wind velocity on one side of that? So ask of the crew that all eyes are up the water, and we're thinking about that all the time. Generally, a scow, my main trimmer, Tim Kreck, who's a very gifted sailor, and I are in constant communication of what we think, or how do we want to position ourselves for the first quarter of the beat. The helmsman really, in my mind, has to start the boat, and I still get butterflies every time the gun goes off. I think that's good. I think that's telling me that, we're getting ready to go to battle here, and winning the start, or at least getting off the line, is a critical part of sailboat racing. So I'm amped up and ready to go. You can set the boat up for whatever type of sailor you are, whatever makes you feel good, and whatever makes the boat feel good to you at the helm. I'm a bit of a pincher. I sail the boat high, so you can sail the boat lower. Depends on who you are and what makes you feel good in a sailboat. There is a balance to the boat, and that all has to do with the boat going through the water and how it feels. And when the boat starts to track, we're getting close to being in the maximum slot. And that's a great feeling. Eyes up the water all the time, eyes on other boats, particularly who to be, the better boats, the better your competition.
Every sailor has a different style, and I sail a lot on feel. What feels fast? How does my heel angle feel? How is my helm? Do we feel like we're going fast right now? And a lot of that is just me making minor adjustments while I'm out there, whether it's my trim, my heel angle. And I felt like that was kind of the key for me to sail fast.
The future of scows is, I got to believe that we're 100 probably 120 years under our belt so far, and I think we've moved along pretty well with the performance advances that are available to us. Certainly in building materials, we're on a par with any boat that's built any place in the world. If we keep our young people going with the energy it takes, the dedication and learning how to fool Mother Nature and the likes of that, we're going to keep going. There's no question in my mind.
One thing that's so great about the class is that it's been through enough of these changes, whether it's been aluminum masts or fiberglass boats or the asymmetrical, that it always ends up coming out the other end not only just fine, but better. You know, have faith in the process.
You know, I think as long as we continue to innovate, we continue to balance economics and performance, I think the next century is going to be a ton of fun.
Will it foil at some point? You know, somebody's going to try it. Is that going to be affordable? What's it going to do to the boat? Is it going to make it too hard to sail? Who knows? I'd sure like to go foiling on an e-scow, though. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
We have a responsibility for maintaining this unique and special thing. So, not only for our kids, but for the greater sailing world. I can't think of anything else quite like it. Lucky enough to live overseas, and sail in Australia and England and Italy and, other places. And of course, almost everybody knows who Buddy is. But once you get past that question, they go, so what are these scows like? What's that all about? And so even for the people who've never been on one or even seen one up close, they know about them and they know that they're special. So let's not forget that.